Analysts say the government's intervention in GM by forcing out its CEO is one of the most dramatic acts taken by the White House since the economic crisis started. But it's not the first time the U.S. has stepped into the private sector. Joining me now with more on this story is Daniel Ikenson, Associate Director for the Center for Trade and Policy Studies at the Cato Institute. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So what is your reaction today to today's developments with the president's intervention with these two companies?
Well, I credit the administration for at least showing a little tough love. The Bush administration didn't do that. They put a little cherry on top of the sundae and handed GM and Chrysler $17.4 billion, circumventing the wishes of Congress, in fact. Obama at least is saying you haven't met your goals, you haven't met your objectives, and these are what those objectives are. The bigger problem, though, is that Obama, I don't think, is necessarily interested in just the short-term viability of these companies. He seems to think that he wants the auto industry to be a model of green production going forward, and that requires a lot of investment, and that's not something that I think is necessarily in the cards. It's at competing odds with short-term profitability.
These are private companies, private businesses. What kind of precedent does this set?
A lot of bad precedents have been set over the past several months. I think had the Bush administration abided the wishes of Congress back in December and not given any bailout money to the companies, the private sector would have come in. Private investors would have come in and purchased Chrysler. For example, Chrysler is owned by Cerberus, and Cerberus said, we're not going to devote any more money to Chrysler because we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders. But what about the government's responsibility to the taxpayer? If Cerberus isn't going to buy Chrysler, why should taxpayers put their necks on the line? As long as government policy is in flux, every Monday we hear new pronouncements, investors are going to stay on the sidelines, and there's going to be more uncertainty. That needs to stop. We need to stop these grand pronouncements.
You've spoken very strongly against any kind of bailout for the auto industry from the very beginning.
Yes.
What would be the alternative if the federal government didn't step in and if the government today didn't take these aggressive actions?
The alternative is really what we're going into, which is really the bankruptcy process. I think what President Obama is trying to show Americans is that bankruptcy doesn't necessarily mean liquidation. It doesn't necessarily mean the end of GM and Chrysler. So he's hand-holding them. He's saying, I'm going to escort them into this process. We are going to guarantee warranties, which is one of the reasons the management didn't want to go into bankruptcy, because they thought people wouldn't buy their cars. They already aren't buying their cars. But a bankruptcy judge is in a better position than the president to identify the liabilities and the assets and how to structure them, how to restructure them. The president should not be involved in telling CEOs to step down when that's the province of boards. The administration doesn't know what's best for this industry. The shareholders do.
Rick Wagner is now out at GM. We now have new leadership, but it's someone who was just there yesterday as the president of the company.
Right.
Does this make a difference? Will this new leadership change this company?
You know, I think it had something to do with bad taste in some members of Congress's mouths. The whole jet scandal from November when the big three guys came for seeking bailouts left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. I don't see how it's going to change much. I mean, Rick Wagner made some reforms, but he also oversaw $73 billion in losses over the past 6 years. But I'm not really in a position to judge whether he is the man for the present or the future, nor is President Obama.
All right, Daniel Ikenson joining us from the Cato Institute. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.